change management is becoming a very, it's a new topic that's becoming more and more important in project management. For a long time, project management focused on just getting the deliverables done and then stop. If you're on time, on budget, you did the scope, you're good. But now we realize we're looking for more than that. It's not just did you deliver this stuff, are people actually starting to use it and achieve the business benefits that we anticipated, right? The project business case anticipates the deliverables will actually get used. So now you start to see PMI starting to whisper about change management, people change management, organizational change management, making sure that whatever you produce in the project actually is used as intended to achieve objectives. So that means near the end of a project now, maybe project managers should start looking at building a change plan as part of your deliverables. You won't be around for the year or two that it'll take to roll things out and achieve all those benefits, but you can certainly get the process kicked off before you go. Make sure that people are, training is happening, deployment activities are going on, the right communications are being revealed. So these skills in project management of being a change manager are becoming more and more important. And there's whispers from PMI that they may start including some change management topics around benefits realization and things like that, which involves a lot of change management, that may start to appear in future editions of the PMBOK guide. We may start to see those as required core skill sets. So it might be interesting to get ahead of this curve. Today we have Sandra Reimer. She's probably one of the top change management experts in the country. She's going to talk to you about change management, a number of different certifications that are out there. What do they mean? What are the differences? What are the key concepts of change management? She's going to talk to you about some opportunities to move forward in this area and what that looks like. It'll be an interesting presentation, a very attractive presentation, interesting slides. I'm pleased to announce Sandra. Sandra, you have the floor.
Great. Hi, everyone. I'm really sorry that I couldn't be there in person, but thank you so much for this opportunity, Kevin and Procept and everyone for helping me to get set up. I think there's a pretty large crowd there in the room. Everyone can hear me okay, Kevin? Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Somebody just say yep.
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Wonderful. So let's get started. I'm going to say next slide if you wouldn't mind to move things over. Next slide.
Yeah, be patient.
I'm asking you to change slide. So today we're in a really fast-paced changing world, and all of you must feel it in the room. You know, we've entered something called the transformation era, and really the only thing that seems constant these days is change itself. Really ask yourself, what's not changing these days? Whether it's in your personal life or your professional life or your school life, whatever you might be doing. You know, we're hearing about Uber's driverless cars coming. We're hearing about even fridges with computers built in. You know, in addition to delivering our grocery before, we're going to take it one step further now. The iPhone, you know, the next version of robotics, apparently eventually all the mundane tasks in our corporations that we work for are really right now, as we speak, being developed to have them being replaced by robotics, which is a really cool idea, but all of this change really does seem to be a constant in today's world. And just when we think that we've had enough, there's going to be more and more and more coming. So like Kevin said, we need to get ahead of this curve. Next slide. So you remember the good old days where we would go through some change, and when it was all over, we would take a big sigh at our desks in our office and sit back and say, oh, wow, we're done that, move on. And then everything would go back to normal. There'd be a bit of a lull period. And then, you know, maybe we would get another change months or years later, but it wasn't as frequent. And they're saying now that those days are gone. We're seeing change that is way more complex, really groundbreaking, change that is global, cross-functional, and moving faster than ever. I mean, think about in the news some of the things that we're seeing right now where we're breaking new boundaries. Just a couple weeks ago, we had a drone hit an airplane for the first time, and it stumped the legal system to say, well, who governs that space? What really happens in the air, and who's really at fault, and what do we do? Which is now going to embark about some change around that legislation in terms of how do we monitor that space in the air? And if we replace, for example, our employees with those robots, as I said, the simple mundane tasks to basically become more efficient sounds wonderful, but who's going to pay for the taxes? Who's going to file the income tax, which pays for our roads and our school systems? And with that deficit in funding, what's going to happen to our economy? So all of this bigger, more complex, faster change is moving faster than we can even think about it. I know right now in the news another hot topic is that they're thinking of building a bullet train from Montreal to Windsor through the corridor. Whether or not it'll happen, but apparently it's in the next 20-year range. That will be crazy cool. You know, all of us will probably spread out and not have to be so congested in Toronto. But what will that do to the price of housing? Will we see more companies now move to Canada? And what will happen if I all of a sudden pick up and now move over to Windsor, where right now I guess most people visit there for the casino and everything? Well, will we all spread out and have cheaper cost of housing? Will we even need to go to work? Every change that's implemented in the world has a ripple effect across everyone, but we don't always think about the implications beyond what the obvious is in the actual technology project that we're trying to implement. Whether that's a new product, a new service, an office move, there is a bigger, far more reaching impact. Next slide. According to PricewaterhouseCoopers, a recent study that was published on Gartner, it says 76% of CEOs said that their ability to adapt to change is going to be a key source of a competitive advantage. See, the crazy part is that when you go into a bookstore like Chapters and you walk along the shelves and you see, you know, things like how to be a better parent or never have to diet again or live the life you want, this type of positive change, the personal type I'm talking about that gets you really excited and wants you to take charge of your life, that type of change sells. But the reality is that corporate change doesn't have such a positive impact. It's got more of a negative connotation to it. Even the most engaged associates start to worry about the stability of their future during times of change. We wake up in the morning and we trust that our car is going to start, we trust that we're going to show up at work, we trust that our jobs are going to be there, and we trust there's going to be work to do. And then we trust that we're going to get a paycheck that's going to give us a warm and fuzzy place to live and, you know, food on the table and all that. But during times of change, we wonder about whether that will still hold true. And that is what makes change tough. It's because it taps into everybody's fundamental need of why we go to work. Will I still have a job? Will the product I'm still working on be around? Will my boss still give me that raise? Will I be able to go and afford that vacation at Christmas with my family? And we enter something called the Valley of Despair. And I know that some of you will say, well, that's not the case in every change. But in reality is we do all go through that at our own pace and at our own level. And we all have different reactions to it. Some people embrace it and see it as an opportunity, and others see it as a scary, really unsure time of where to go through, and they just can't wait for it to be over. But until they feel safe and secure back to normal, whatever their approach is, we go into something called this Valley of Despair, and it is the art of change management that tries to say, make that as quick as possible so that we can get out of it. But what if it doesn't have to be this way? And what if during this time period that we're all in with this age of transformation where we keep going through change over and over and over, don't you think that at some point all of this kind of Valley of Despair and the way we go about change will actually become the new norm? So rather than look at it as scary or an opportunity, it will just become the way that we exist within a corporation. As Kevin was just saying, PMI is thinking about including the practice of change management as well as PMAC. And, you know, lots of different change organizations are spinning up. But what about if it becomes more of a norm, just the way that we exist today in our corporations? What if we reach a place that we're so comfortable with change that we actually become experts in it and we just consider it a part of our daily life? So because of the fact that to really understand change is actually hard for some people, this is why companies will invest in change management, and it's become a slowly increasing more popular practice, but it's taken some time to come around in the industry because it's hard to really articulate what it is to manage change. So if we turn to the next slide, I want to take a second so that you guys can all feel what change really feels like. Take a pen and a piece of paper, or imagine yourself doing this if you don't have it in front of you, and try writing your name for a second with your opposite hand. And Kevin, you'll be my eyes there in the room if everybody is actually doing it and has the opportunity to do this exercise.
A few are. Most have pads of paper and pens, but just a few are trying it.
Perfect. And those of you that don't have a paper and pen, watch the folks who are doing it. And try writing your name with your opposite hand. And really think about, what does that feel like? And if someone in the room that's doing that right now, could you share with us, what does it feel like?
Hard. We hear hard.
Probably hard, but it's doable for some of us. Like with certain pens, I'm a left-handed and I can write in both hands, so it's an exception for me.
Okay, so Mohammed's ambidextrous. He's lucky.
Of course, there's always one.
Yeah.
That's great. So, you know, you're well versed with change. So imagine I'm a corporation now, and I come in and I tell you guys, from here on in, everybody has to write with their opposite hand. You know, we saw the one person who's comfortable with doing that. They're flexible. They jumped right in. They embraced the change. But for the majority of the folks in the room, probably find a little bit awkward, a little bit different, wondering, why do I got to do that? Why wouldn't I just do what I'm used to doing? And this is a really good example to really get a feel for. That's exactly, the parallel is exactly what we feel in an organization when our employers come in and tell us to do something different. When we start going through real change in your organization, I want you to reflect back on this exercise, or as you're going through this presentation, think back to this exercise, because the art of change management is managing that uncomfortableness that each of you felt in the room differently. And whether you embraced it or felt that that writing exercise was a little awkward, wondering why you're doing it, this is the art of change management. This is the role of the change manager, which is to help everybody through that uncomfortableness. Next slide. So the brutal reality that not too many people will put straight out on the table, as you're going to see today, is that change is hard. And you're going to be working with some people, like I said, who will embrace it. Some of you will be part of your DNA and how you just react to it. Myself personally, I thrive on change. I'm not the typical operational type gal who's going to show up and do exactly status quo and go home at the end of the day. I actually really enjoy change. I enjoy the transformation of going and helping people to achieve what they didn't think was possible and to break new grounds and think of how to do things efficiently. But that's not for everybody. Some of you in the room might say, you know what, I prefer to not go through this. I prefer things to be a bit more status quo. So you will take some, you know, after this course and in your journey on change management, some introspection is required to think about, you know, how do I personally handle change and what will my role be in change? And later I'll talk a little bit more about an offering that Vertex has to help you to facilitate with that self-discovery. But when I'm interviewing with employers, what I tell them is that change is hard, and if you want someone who's going to tell you otherwise, that it's pretty much smooth sailing, to be honest with you, that's a big red flag when I'm interviewing people, because then I know they truly haven't been through change. The analogy that I quite often use to people, in addition to the handwriting example, is I talk about a pilot flying an airplane. And when there's turbulence, because you know there's going to be turbulence in the sky, the pilot doesn't get on the PA system and say, oh my God, fasten your seatbelts, we're in big trouble here. Oh my God, sit down, sit down. No, he calmly gets on the PA system and says, ladies and gentlemen, we are ready to hit some turbulence, fasten your seatbelts. Please refrain from walking in the aisles. And he does it in a very calm disposition to say, it's quite normal. We've been through this before, you're safe. And that's the mindset of a true change agent, where despite that turbulence, despite knowing that it's hard, you can still get in the organization and tell everybody to calmly fasten their seatbelts, even knowing that it's going to be bumpy. That's what you're striving to get to as a change agent. But the reality is that's really hard to do. And through gaining experience and exposure, you become more tainted, if you will, or capable of dealing with that bumpiness. But I can tell you, even from my own personal experience, when I was starting out doing this, that was not the case. It took some time to adapt to that and realize that that was the norm and that it was actually my role to help people get through it. The communication element is so important, and the position and your professionalism through the change reflects on your capabilities as a change leader. Next slide. So I jumped into a bit telling about myself here, and I wanted to kick off to really give the message of change being hard before I introduced myself. Again, I'm Sandra Reimer, and I've been leading change for 20 plus years now, doing transformations. And I've been fascinated by the change ecosystem and people's reactions to change. And what I mean by that is, throughout my experience, I've seen what works, what doesn't. I've been a part of that bumpy ride that I've just explained to you. And I've seen the people's reactions, the corporate reactions. I've seen basically how hard change is, and how much of a need that there is for change, but how difficult it can be to sell this practice when it's not trained always the right way, and it can become way too complicated for people to wrap their heads around. I wanted to produce something that was really simple and easy for folks to wrap their heads around, and that would actually allow them to manage the real reason on why we manage change, which is that uncomfortableness. I started down the path of looking at it from the employee lens, as me choosing the right employer to work from. The Vertex model not only helps you lead change from the corporate point of view, from your maybe possibly change leadership, but will also help you look at the lens of, should I take this new position when this company is going through change? Are they going to be successful at what they're doing? I have a lot of certifications behind my name, my PMI, CP, my Discipline Agile, my PMP, ProSci, which is another organizational change management framework, my Lean IT, a bunch of social styles, which are the psychological personalities, DISC, Myers-Briggs as well, my Lean Six Sigma, and I'm also finishing up my basic French and German. So I have covered the gamut of certifications. And now I've put it all together to create Vertex. And I want to spend this presentation telling you why it's different, and why I find it a lot easier, and share the information that I've had and tell you, if you like what you hear, the next steps that you could pursue. Next slide. So here's my corporate change experience background. I have been a part of 5 large mergers and acquisitions and right-sizing initiatives, all the way down to where the entire company was pulled into an offsite within 10 minutes notice and told that we've just been bought out, and that tomorrow every single person's job was going to be different, down to process improvement initiatives, or lean efforts, if you will, where the big buzz is do more with less. I've been a part of analogies where they say we're going to turn the cruise ship into a speedboat, to basically give the connotation that, we're heavy and fat and we need to be able to be quick and nimble like a rabbit. I've heard the gamut of those analogies. I've been a part of organizations that have really tried hard to launch brand new products to wipe out their competition, and discontinue products and services that maybe they no longer needed, or move their data centers into the cloud. I've been a part of adopting new technologies. I've been a part of organizations that wanted to really only change their culture as opposed to some product or technology, which was really getting the people to behave differently, such as a larger, slower organization wanting them to become more quick and nimble and innovative. I've been a part of office location changes, and I've also helped several organizations in the U.S. expand to new markets, such as getting into the European market and as well as Asia Pacific. And I've also been a leader in change myself in my personal life. I have gone through a lot of change in my personal life, but I'll spare you all the details. But the point I'm trying to make is that I've covered the gamut with change in my 20 years of experience. I can tell you that change is hard, but I also can't share the very specific organizational names, as you can respect the confidentiality behind some of these stories that I'm about to tell you. Next slide. But so I was telling you about these certifications behind my name. And what I did was, I got to be totally honest with you, I frantically during this 20-year period started trying to consume large doses of information to try to get ahead of how to make this change easier. By taking all of these certifications, I thought, oh yeah, if I take this one, I'll get this extra bit of knowledge. If I take this one, I'll get this extra bit of knowledge. But I wound up feeling overtrained, a huge amount of money and investment. I started spinning, and I was also looking at my employers and my stakeholders, and they would get confused, not by my communication, but naturally out of which one they should use, they were getting confused themselves. Different frameworks, different company names. In the end, all of these are great. Don't get me wrong. I'm a very big advocate of every single one of these certifications, and I'm very proud, and they are definitely a competitive advantage of me getting employment. But the reality is that when it came time to practically use them and practically sell them to the organizations from a strategic capacity at my director level, it became very difficult. I needed one simple, holistic approach that integrated everything together and took the best pieces. So I'm probably dating myself, and I think they still sell them in the stores, but the good old Rubik's Cube is kind of what I felt like on the left here. And when I created Vertex, it was a way to detangle the mess and have one simple approach that I could use and explain really, really well. Next slide. Part of the problem was that I would have all these experts show up on my projects. I would have the delivery lead or delivery director or the project sponsor, and he would be shouting, just meet the target, just meet the goals, just deliver, because his bonus would be tied to that, or his objectives for the organization. I'd have the lean consultant who was chronically asking me to ask why 5 times and look for a more simplified way to do the work when the other guy was telling him that the work was already decided. I'd have the project manager who was trying to put together a really beautiful looking project schedule and ask where the risk was. And I'd have an agile scrum master who would say, are we ready for feedback and what sprint are we in? And then I'd have a change manager show up on my projects, and they would start saying, what do we need to train and communicate? And people would wonder if they were from HR. And so the problem is that, here's the crutch, is that it was still one project where a bunch of people paid a bunch of money to get a specific amount of work done. But I have all these extra people showing up, which cost my organization money. They all came in with completely separate frameworks, and they were all multiple leads from multiple areas that were confusing everybody. Next slide. So what I started to do is say, okay, wait a minute here. They all bring something valuable to the table, but how can I pull this together in the most cost-effective, efficient way where I can meet my own objectives to get the work done? So I noticed that they were all still taking a primary change focus around the technical change. And when I say technical change, I don't necessarily mean, code and software and server upgrades. I mean, any project that you're on, whether it's building a bridge, building a rocket ship, going out and designing a new product, moving offices, the actual concrete project schedule type plan. I want to go out and I want to implement a new product. I go through some type of discovery, some type of development, some type of planning. I actually go out and test it, and then I launch it into market. Or perhaps your change going on at your organization might be something like, I want to move my data center, I want to create a new hospital. You still have to go through some type of planning, some type of design, some type of building, and then development and testing. So we're talking about that traditional type of technology path of building the actual product or service. Can I hear from some folks out there what kind of changes you're going through right now in your lives or in your corporations to kind of tailor the presentation to these technology changes that might exist out there? Does anybody have a change they want to share that might be going on in their existing company?
Don't all put your hands up at once now. Volunteer, yes.
We're going through an office modernization change, so we've changed locations twice.
Okay, Sandra, office modernization with 2 recent location changes. Somebody else? There was
Oh, wow.
another hand at the back.
We are moving from print documentation into electronic documentation.
Moving from print documents to electronic documents.
Mm-hmm.
Evolving technology, many organizations moving out of cloud.
Moving into the cloud.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Anybody?
Yeah.
This side
So
of,
you can see how,
hang
go
on.
ahead.
The right side of the room has not been speaking. What about you guys? Anybody? Luch, you guys are going through tons of change.
Oh, well.
See, I know you.
I want
That's,
to highlight it. So we have some realignment by functions, organizational change, so we can better deliver to our clients.
so reorging to align better by function.
Mm-hmm. The silo, getting rid of breaking down the silos, that's a big one.
Yeah. Anybody else? Anybody else on this side? Okay, I think that's it.
Mm-hmm. So whether or not, you don't have to share your story behind it, but most of the time, organizations that are more immature with managing change will focus on this technology plan. So in these examples that you've just raised, your organization might have had some type of design, how that new office location should look like, how the cloud should look like, all these examples, designed it out, just like a true project that you've learned from PMI, from all the great classes you've been taking with Procept. So, but there's more to it than just that. And I want to share a little bit more about why that solid plan is so important. That traditional project management approach is very, very important. But what else is there when you're managing change? Next slide. So again, that scope, we need to make something happen. The time, maybe it's a time-bound project, and then a certain amount of money. These transformation initiatives, I want to make sure that you understand that they're still a project and they still follow that triple constraint. Next slide. Sharing one of my own examples since I'm not in the room. I picked one of them from my history, a new and improved online banking site that I made in one of my previous organizations. It had a very solid 15-month project schedule. It was very accurate. It was very inclusive of all the tasks that we needed to be successful, and every single stakeholder bought into that plan and was aligned. It was fully resourced. We had very skilled experts, the best of the best, both contract and full-time, and exactly the right number. And we had full approval to the budget, and it was secured to the fiscal plan. But was that enough to make it successful? Let's continue. Next slide. It was not. And so the change management side, the missing elements that I want to speak to you about is that even the best transformational idea with a solid schedule will be basically rendered useless when employees can't use it, support it, or customers don't buy it. Bringing the people on board is critical. And so let's get into what that means. Next slide. It basically means that at the end of the day, if you move to that office location, you move to the cloud, you launch the new online banking site, the frontline people know best how things need to work. They know what we need to be successful. And at the end of the day, if the service, sales, marketing, everyone, if they cannot actually sell it, use it, support it, or the internal employees can't actually support it, how can we possibly service our customers? If the customers don't actually buy it because it doesn't have X, Y, and Z feature, were we actually truly successful? Next slide. So in my example of the new and improved online banking site at my anonymous company, there could be a number of problems that should have been managed initially. Most of our support calls could be about something else, and we've now designed a support center that doesn't accommodate this. Some of the associates in the call center maybe needed training on A, B, and C. Maybe feature Y doesn't make sense, and we really needed Z. In other words, we can no longer now sell it. People just won't buy it. People could be forced to resign if they have to move new offices, if we were shutting down an office and opening up another office. People might not be taking to the new leader in a certain new location or with the change of leadership. And the employees might actually say, well, I don't understand why we didn't do X versus Y. That makes no sense. And then they will be less engaged, and then employee engagement scores will go down. So you could see how a simple online banking project with a really great schedule, resources, and a secure budget could go really wrong if the associates, the employees, and the customers were not engaged in the design and the delivery of the final product. Next slide. And this is a true example, by the way. So during my career, what I've done is I've added 3 additional elements to take a more holistic view of the transformation initiative. Those are the new culture. What behaviors need to take us into the new world? For example, I gave you, if we're a slower moving organization, how will we get the employees to be more fast, innovative? That could be a huge change in itself, dealing with this first initial work package. New skills. What hard and soft skills do our customers, maybe both internal and external, and our employees need to get to the new future state? And then the third work package I'm proposing is new business processes. What are the existing and to-be processes that we need to do to support the new future state. So if you take something like the office move, maybe there is a new culture that's needed for the new office. Maybe there are some new skills for the people. Maybe it's just a new process. For example, I will share one of my own office moves that I did at a previous organization where we moved from assigned desks, that was the traditional norm, especially for this more old school type culture, to basically having unassigned seating where you swipe your badge and go and find one of your seats. And that seems like such an easy change. We absolutely had the great project schedule. We had the right number of resources. We had the budget. We had the corporate sponsorship and everything. But what had happened was, as soon as people were still sitting in the same seats, people now lost their ability to keep their shoes at their desk. All those simple things that the employees all those simple things that employees really valued were gone. They had to take their pens home with them now, when before they could just leave them home at their desk. All these little things needed to be addressed beforehand to manage the change successfully. In the end, what we did is we ended up giving people lockers, which helped out, which goes to show that you can still refine the approach later on, but some of those items could have been addressed up front. Now, some of you in the room will say, but you were still successful. The change took place, and absolutely. But again, change management is making that uncomfortableness and that kind of period of valley of despair, as I called it, as you saw in the example of writing your hand, going through it really, really quickly with minimal disruption. Next slide. And so that leads me to Vertex definition of change management. You are going to see hundreds of definitions of change management out here. In the approach that I've created, I tried to simplify it and really take in and capture all these things I've taught you up till now in these slides. Change management is helping the impacted people, and I underline that. The people who need to do something differently tomorrow, they're going to need to operate differently or exist differently in this future state. Change management is helping the impacted people move to and operate in a future state with minimal disruption. And again, I don't say no disruption because change is hard. There will always be that disruption. So I'm saying, how do we minimize it and make it not as noisy? Next slide. So some of my observations around not doing that uncomfortableness fast and doing it properly. So there's an impact to us as employees as well as an employer impact. And some of the employer impacts I see are reputational risk, lost clients, employee absenteeism, so there's sick days, leaves of absences, grievances, HR issues, legal fees. Sometimes you can have problems with lawsuits, unplanned recruiting, people resigning, retention issues, low morale, low engagement score, and just a poor quality of products that people don't want to purchase anymore from you. And this, by creating those gaps of lost features and lost service in the organization, this gives an opening to competition to come and steal your business. Employee impacts, this is interesting because, nobody else talks about this employee impact, but being a change agent as well as somebody who might be just sitting and being impacted by other changes going on in the organization, I want to call these out. There can be a reputational risk to join an organization that is going through change where it's a poor fit, it's too fast, it's a bit more command and control where they're telling you they need to do it, not engaging you, or the ideas are too lofty. And the reason being is because you are going to be a part of that plan, and you will wear that kind of mark on what was your role at that organization. And depending on your level in the career, you might be expected to kind of step up and change things. You could actually experience stagnant career growth if you're not careful. For a limited time, no mentorship might exist, and the focus could be shifting from helping you with your career to more replacing your role or changing your role in the organization. And your work-life balance, there could be concerns there. I have seen a number of folks who have had to work on change initiatives at organizations which are above and beyond their day job. You have heard from this presentation that it's still a project, it still needs to be done, and the organizations who are not managing change as a project will kind of treat it almost like a sideshow or something that needs to be done, or if they don't understand what change is, you will not get the budget and resources and be expected to do that above and beyond your day job, which can create obviously low morale. So the point in this slide is that it is so important to manage change not just from a profitability and an impact for the customers from the employer side, but your own personal career growth and work-life balance and happiness really does depend on managing change as well. Next slide. So what's the path forward? How do we avoid this minimal disruption? Next slide. So the answer that I've come up with is Vertex, and it's an approach that puts the people first using a very simple, holistic approach that engages the frontline people to bring them to the finish line. In other words, the premise is that every person in the organization at their own pace with their own concerns, you need to bring them on board and get them across the finish line. Next slide. So some of you might have heard about other change management frameworks in the industry. So there's Procept, which is probably one of the most popular. There is a book, John Cotter's, if you haven't read it, you can buy it on Amazon or Chapters or wherever, Leading Change, which has 8 steps to leading change. The other ones you can see here, less popular ones, but that are out there. Bridges' Transitional Model, Rogers' Early Adopter Curve, Gleicher's Formula, Kubler-Ross Change Curve. The Vertex training, whether it's 1 day or 3 days, that Procept is our preferred training provider. We touch upon all of those so that you can do a more deep dive comparative analysis. But what I found being in the field is I am Procept certified. The others do not offer a certification. But what I found was Procept is the only other methodology that actually has a bit more of a prescribed process and practical templates and artifacts to use. But for myself, when I was out there in the field, I got a little bit confused because they still treated project management separately from change management. So I needed a more integrated approach and something that I personally feel a picture's worth 1,000 words. So I tried to think of, how could I portray this in the room? How can I easily, in a 2 minutes kind of give everybody the lowdown of change management without having them look at hundreds of templates and artifacts and try to put this together? So Vertex takes a little bit more of that integrated approach, the change process, the template, but it also as well tries to use an analogy that resonates with everybody to help them understand why it's important to measure change. And the remainder of this presentation, I want to take you through what that analogy is. Next slide. So the Vertex methodology, as you know, Vertex is the peak of a mountain, or the pinnacle of a mountain. It's based off of an analogy called the rain shadow effect. I don't want to lose you, but basically, I don't know if you've ever been out to British Columbia or anywhere where there's large mountains. There's something in science called the rain shadow effect. And basically, in a nutshell, moist, warm air blows inland from the ocean, and as it hits a mountain, it rises up, cools, the clouds become so heavy that it just drops the rain. The rain cannot make it over to the other side. And because the rain can't make it over to the other side, poor folks who just bought a home on the wet side of the mountain are always being rained on. And the other folks, they just never get that rain to grow proper grass. If we could just get a bigger gust of wind, or those clouds could just hold a bit more water and get some sunshine, they could get some relief. So I started to think about, I recently went to Hawaii for 2 weeks on vacation, and I had a layover in Vancouver, and I started thinking about how that analogy really relates to change and how some departments and organizations just can't get their change to lift off, and they just can't seem to make an impact on those adopters. And then I started thinking about, too, that, this analogy of the wind blowing off the ocean and trying to lift up and pull the clouds, that sometimes we just can't get the right business drivers to make the change. If you go to the next slide, I want to relate it a bit more back to the corporation now. So here we have the Vertex model in a nutshell here. Phase 1 is where we're going to build a change ecosystem. Whether this originated from one person that has a very, very small grassroots type change to impact their department, or whether the originator is really a corporate large-scale initiative that we need to do, such as moving into the cloud or moving offices. Phase 1 is the most important phase of any change initiative, where we need to make sure that the right change ecosystem exists. And that big gust of wind that pulls from the ocean to lift those clouds up to make it rain over the mountain, We call those the change drivers. There has to be basically a big gust of wind that's so strong that it moves people from their chairs and it lifts them into action. And sometimes that can be a push or a pull in the market, such as there could be a legislative change, such as you remember when the good old HST came out. That was something that forced us all to change whether we liked it or not. We had to charge the additional tax. But other times it could be just a really good idea. You know, hey, I've got a new product to launch, or I've got a great new way that we can process invoices at our organization. I call that bit more of a pull rather than a push. Profits, cost reduction, culture, society, whatever the case may be, these change drivers call people into action. It's an idea that basically says, we need to do something different. Next page. So the next part, phase 2, it becomes very important, where we got to create the change business case and the change plan. What we're doing right now during this phase is we're trying to document this idea. And in order to make sure that it's legitimate and that it is something that we all believe in that we need to do, we start to engage the frontline customers, stakeholders, and employees for input and validation. It is through that validation that the change lifts off. And like in the analogy of the rain effect, if it's just too heavy, like it's just not the right time, we don't have the right funding, we don't have the right sponsorship, it's just too lofty of an idea or not the priority, the clouds are going to dump the water and the rain will not make it over to the other side. The change will not lift off and you will never be able to get the traction you need. And so really, at the end of the day, what we want to do is we want to be able to get the validation from the frontline people doing the work to say, this makes sense. Yeah, people would actually buy that product. I would be happy with that move. And sometimes in this phase, you're engaging them just to even be heard. But 99 times out of 100 from my experience, you're actually going to get a lot of things that you didn't even know would be a part of the solution or concern that you didn't even know exist. Some folks will say, well, should I really be involving people if we know there are layoffs coming with this change? And I get that question asked all the time. I can honestly tell you, whether or not this happens in organizations, it is my personal belief that there is no situation that I have found to date where it is not important enough to engage the frontline staff in building the product and designing their future, for two reasons. You don't have to tell them if there are corporate changes coming along to restructuring. Most people actually can draw that conclusion themselves, and it still takes away from the actual business problem. And at the end of the day, there's still a problem that needs to be solved where people have to solution and come up with ideas. And by enlisting their support in those ideas, they are still playing their role at the organization. Change is inevitable. There are people that do get laid off with change, but it should not be the focus of the conversation. It is really just an output. And most of the time, you know, for your own self, from an employee point of view, there is still a lot of great opportunity being even part of an environment that you might find scary like that. For example, on your resume, you're going to get incredible experience talking about being a part of leading change or just being a part of navigating change. You're also going to get a lot of opportunities to shape the future, which looks great to put on your resume. And as well, you know the next organization is probably going to be going through change, and you'll be able to draw on those parallels on how to help them. And we know firsthand from having been part of large restructurings myself that most employees who can show that initiative and show those qualities and those kind of idealistic kind of attributes that take us ahead in our organization and the top performers, you don't want to lose those, and the organization is going to take care of you and find some way, another role for you or another department or find a way for you to contribute and make you feel valued through the change. That's the ideal setup there. At some point, you need to rally enough people to believe in your cause and to believe in this business case. And in the course, the 1 to 3 day course for Vertex, you go through actually what it's like to create a change business case and how to create that integrated project change schedule. And at some point, the change is going to lift off to a place where we now have an agreed upon, aligned sponsorship to take action on this change, and we have a solid plan. So this vertex, or pinnacle of the mountain, is that action point that is imperative to reach in any change initiative, no matter how big or small it is. Next slide. Now that we have a solid plan, we now reach phase 3, where we're preparing for change execution. And from here, if your plans are solid, you're going to use an agile approach to executing them. Rather than going big bang and then surprising the adopters on the other side, the Vertex framework suggests this, similar to the agile methodologies today. You're going to break up the scope into smaller testable components so that you can give some sort of demo or feedback along your journey, which is going to be unique to your project. And again, it's so important, because if you surprise the early adopters at the end and you haven't engaged them, there are far too many risks, because the adopters at the other end need to cross the finish line to use and adapt to the new way of working, whether they're your internal or external customers. Next slide. And so when you put it all together, the 4-phase framework looks exactly like this. Phase 1, we're making sure that we have that right change ecosystem. Or, as an employer, we're going to need to create it. We're going to have to go back to the drawing board to find those compelling reasons why we need to change. What is it in the market that needs to change? In phase 2, we're going through and we're creating those change business plans. But in phase 1, if I'm an employee and I'm joining an organization and I'm not quite sure, I want to ask those tough interview questions. I want to ask my leaders, and I'm going to make some decisions on whether or not I think I can have an impact, or whether or not I want to sign up for what's going on. I'm going to be part of executing the change plans. In phase 3, I'm going to complete the change execution based on my role in the change. And in phase 4, the organization goes to collect change feedback. And in the 1 to 3 day course we're teaching, we talk a little bit about how to collect that feedback, whether it's through surveys or focus groups, and teach some different techniques on how to do that. Next slide. So some of you might be asking, why not just skip over the mountain? Why not just go right over? And the analogy here is that would be more of the authoritarian kind of command and control approach. At the end of the day, if I go over to a bunch of adopters and I say, hey, you need to now write with your left hand instead of your right hand, that feeling, if you go back to that initial example that we used at the beginning of this presentation, all of you would turn to me and say, why? Why do I need to do something different? Why would I put myself through that uncomfortableness? And the reality is today, I'm not sure how many of you in the room are in IT, but it's a booming market. At the end of the day, if employees don't feel respected and heard, they're not going to want to stay working for your organization. For those of you who are with other organizations, they say the same thing is true of the millennial generation. They need to be engaged, they need to be heard, they need to be, there's a whole course that we offer on ways to sell your ideas and engage change with the different generations. Somebody might be more of the historical, I'm going to bring to the table the facts, the way the organization works. This might be one of your longer tenured employees. One of your newer employees might be able to contribute ideas from outside the organization and draw parallels to their previous experience. But they also say that the different generations are out there today. We're seeing more of an increasing risk. I work with people, some folks have been there for 40 years at organizations I've worked, pretty much their whole life, while some of them have just newly joined. So age is irrelevant. Experience, but also the different generations, they're saying, do matter in terms of how they want to be treated at work. So the authoritarian across the board has gone by way of the dodo bird. Nobody should be using this at work. It creates automatic resistance no matter what. Next slide. So a little bit of the egocentric approach here, where you don't really worry about what it is in the market or the change drivers, whether they're push or pull. You just think your idea is the best. And sometimes, we're all guilty of this. We can have a really, really great idea, and we think that if everybody would just see the light and follow us, we would be able to change the organization. And some of that is just pure passion and energy. I totally get that, because I'm a lot like that myself. But the Vertex model suggests that you should still follow the framework, even if it's a light version, because it is those compelling change drivers that are greater than any one person's needs that are going to rally folks behind the cause for change. Now, if you can do it a little bit more on your personal, you can come up with the idea personally, but you should still anchor them in the change drivers in the business, because at the end of the day, the organization, if you tie it back to the business goals, we found that you'll be more successful in terms of rallying people to focus and put the budget and the time and energy around forming an actual project team, no matter where the idea comes from. Next slide. So I'm going to give a bit of a neutral slide because I don't really know where the audience is from different industries right now, but I love using this example of a family move. It's quite funny actually when I teach this. You know, using this framework just in a really, really simplified way to illustrate the point. Right now, my husband constantly wants to get us to move. We live in Oakville right now, and we want to move closer to, he wants us to move closer to Mississauga because it's easier for us to get the kids to hockey. But I'd like to go to Burlington, actually, and because I want to have a bigger house, I want a bigger yard, and I want the kids to play. And I'm sure everybody right now in the room has their opinion on which way they would go if they were us. I know that I also want to have a little bit of a lesser mortgage and be able to, you know, work on my own things. So in phase one, when we go and build this change ecosystem, what do you think is the first thing that I need to make sure of before I start bringing this home every day? Who wants to suggest some ideas on how I would build this change ecosystem in my house?
Anybody?
Go to the kids.
Go to the kids was the comment.
Go to the kids. Yeah. What's driving the kids? Right. Ask the kids, what is it that they want? And by the way, I did that, just for the record, and it turns out my daughter wants a dog, and we told her that Daddy was allergic to dogs, so we don't have to watch it. We don't have to watch the dog, but if she wants a dog, so she wants a big yard for the dog. Any other ideas on how else I would change? How else would I create that change ecosystem?
Assign priorities.
Assign priorities.
Yeah, and what do you mean by that?
Whatever your drivers are, these wishes that both you and your husband described, list them all and rank them.
List all your
Right.
drivers of you and your husband and rank them was the comment.
Yep, exactly. And starting to get that change to get some meaning. And that's the truth. That's exactly what we started to do. And we really went out there and started looking at homes. We got to a place where the change started to lift off, and before we knew it was a couple of months later, we started to actually put our shoes on, and we've been looking at open houses ever since. Now, we haven't found that right home, but all of those drivers, if you will, hockey, the kids wanting a dog, lesser of a mortgage, all of those drivers together created an ecosystem that allowed the change to lift off. But we wouldn't dare go and pick a home without checking with each other, because what worked for me might not work for my husband and might not work for my kids. So even though, you know, this is my own personal example, in our heads we were doing more of a change business case, if you will, and a change plan, but we still did one. And in the corporate environment, it would be more formal where you'll have the tools, but we still would then go map out once we decide and find that right house. We've done that business case in our head. As soon as we close the deal and find a home, we're going to need some type of project schedule where we're going to have to outline who's going to go to the mortgage, who's going to get the moving truck, when are we going to close stuff down, the utilities. You can see the project schedule, I'm sure, in your heads. So when is the real action? Like, when does the real trigger point happen where we say, we're going to move? Only once all of us agree, right? The kids, the husband, everybody's got to agree. And what if I turned and said to my husband and my kids, yep, it doesn't matter, we're moving no matter what? That would be that authoritarian approach where I'm just kind of changing the adopters without their agreement. Now, ultimately, at the end of the day, they do say happy wife, happy life. But in this case, it would not work. It is just way too big of a change. I can't tell if everyone's laughing in the room. But in this case, no, you must bring everybody on board, and that would be very authoritarian. So now we're going to create the change in the business case. We're going to start the move, and we're going to execute, and we would execute. And then we would probably sit back and have a glass of wine and think, oh, wow, look what we just did. We just uprooted our life and get some feedback. Maybe we might want to paint. Maybe we want to buy some new furniture. But you can see from this very, very simple, non-professional example that the phases really exist even in your personal life. And for someone like me who's a bit more of a driver and, excited about and embracing change, it reminds me to actually slow down and bring people on board, and the importance and the repercussions of not doing that. It makes me think, oh yeah, I must go back and engage people, not just because it will make it work and successful, because I truly wake up every day and tell myself, I'm not going to teach myself something new today. I need to learn it from the other people. I need to hear what they have to, because I can't get somewhere without other people. It reminds me of that every day. Next slide. So we've reached the end now. And I wanted to say that I really enjoyed this opportunity, and thanks again, Kevin. And I would really love to hear from all of you. If you have a chance to email me at sreimer@vertexchangemanagement.com. There's my website, vertexchangemanagement.com. But most important, that if you want to have the more detailed trainings, Procept is a certified training provider. Kevin's there. He can help you to arrange that. I know that there's a possible exam coming with PMAC or with myself. We're still working that out. And I will be offering a pretty cool change profile. From my years of experience with DISC and Profile and Myers-Briggs and everything, what I'm looking to do is create a change profiler, and I'm looking for volunteers who might want to take it for free initially. So if you want to do that, mail me. But what it's going to give you is basically a summary on how you will react to change and the growth opportunities and the strengths that you will bring to the table, so that you can clearly articulate them to an employer or use them for yourself in terms of what type of organization you'll be looking for in your next job search. So similar to the ones that are out there today, but more focused on change management and your role in playing change as a change agent. Thank you.